Hello and welcome to the Brian Carroll Show. I'm your host, Amar Patel, ASP Chair and Brian's sidekick in this adventure. I'm going to turn it over right now to Mr. Brian Carroll for his opening remarks and the state of COVID-19 in California. Brian.
Well, it changes so fast that I may have missed something just being away from the news for the last half hour or so. But it's all around us. Actually, my little school district that I just retired from is the only district that I'm aware of in the immediate area that hasn't canceled school. So I'm glad I did retire, because otherwise I'd still have to be in class. But the hospitals are adjusting. We're nowhere near as bad as San Francisco Bay Area is right now, but we're monitoring the situation. Our governor has made some good efforts to try and get homeless people inside some kind of shelter. He's working with a lot of motels and hotels and other businesses that have rooms, making good efforts to try and get people taken care of. I have not been a big fan of his in the past, but I think he's doing a good job right now trying to get as many people helped as quickly as possible as he can.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, the report from Illinois, unfortunately, we had our first death reported today. And I've been kind of tracking on a graph the cases that are released on a daily basis and trying to encourage people. I mean, it hasn't hit Illinois that hard. And I think the unfortunate reaction for a lot of people when they don't see it firsthand, and you see a lot of stuff on the news or whatever, is to say, well, it's not that bad here, and almost like it can't be because I personally haven't seen it. And so, I'm trying to encourage people to at least, look at the actual data that's coming out and look at actual CDC and World Health Organization information and don't spread misinformation. If you think it's all baloney and a hoax, then that's, your personal opinion, but it's not good to spread that stuff. And what you should be spreading is kind of what we're going to be talking about today is just, kind of solidarity and we're in this together. Politically, there might be calls for action and that we're going to talk about. But at the same time, like social media is just not a good place for that kind of thing. It just foments, bad ideas and bad sharing. And unfortunately, the term viral, is a new meaning right now, but bad ideas go viral just as easily. And so very much in the same way. So I think that's something that I'm seeing in Illinois right now when we're still on the low end, but we can easily, topple over into bad data. So, all right, well, I mean, that kind of leads me to another thing, because this was a big deal in Chicago. It's always a huge celebration. St. Patrick's Day is always a major party day, major day for the establishments in the area to make a lot of money. And there were a lot of videos released of places downtown Chicago that were celebrating in high gear. So I would say a good question for you that might be posed to you like in a debate format would be, what would you say to those people as president of the United States?
There is always the urge when people are tense about something to want a way to let off that tension. And so, if you go back to the bubonic plague, there were all kinds of, dancing and revelry in the face of what was an enormous catastrophe as a way just to release tension. We have other ways to do it, I think. Today, where we have, you can put on a YouTube video and dance your heart out in your own living room. We can get on the phone with people and have virtual parties or something. But there's no excuse for going out. You don't know whether you've got it and you're spreading it, or whether you can pick it up from somebody that doesn't look like they're sick, but they're already contagious. And then you've got it and you spread it to somebody else. Each of us is responsible not to spread this. This is my fourth day now, not going farther than the mailbox out front. And I'm having a good time. I'm enjoying my time, just my wife and I. We have checked in on neighbors by phone, elderly neighbors all around us, and we're checking on them. And they're doing okay. And several local groups, church youth groups, some high school social clubs are organizing to watch out for elderly in the neighborhood. And I love to see that kind of people who are not at high risk volunteering to help people who are at high risk. That's what we need.
Yeah, I agree. I think this is a good opportunity for that sort of, humanity that I think we saw a lot of that after 9/11, especially to our first responders. I mean, just the graciousness that people showed, when the firemen were up and down our street with their boots out collecting for, the families of lost firefighters and other
Mm-hmm.
firefighters. I mean, that was some really good stuff. And I think it is a time where we can come together while we're also fearful, of the unknown and so forth. And I think that, I've been coming back to this in terms of, people who will post and say, well, I should be able to do what I want. And I think to myself, like, yeah, I mean, we're free, we have freedoms. And I think a lot of the people in our party would agree that, the freedoms we have to be balanced with some form of responsibility. And, just like you said, it's, we're in this together. So, you have to be responsible just because you want to go out and do something. It'd be nice if we all could go out and do something in a couple months without any fear of mass contagion. But right now, that's just not the case. And it'd be nice to kind of stay the course, I think is probably a good way of putting it. But thank you for that. And I'm trying to monitor for specific questions that are follow-ups of what we're talking about. So if someone's listening, I do have a question already posted, and there's a place for that coming up in our planned questions for people who submitted earlier. But if you have something, on our current question, and it pops up before we jump away, please feel free to use the Q&A section that's available somewhere on your screen that you can post a question, and we'll try to get to it. We'll try to fit it in, in the natural course of things. All right, Brian. So one of the things that we talk a lot about in the party, and it is one of the principles of Christian democracy, is the word subsidiarity. And a lot of times people get, they say, oh, stop using big words or whatever. But, I personally think it's an awesome word. It really, for me, for the first time I ever heard it, even though, it's a commonly used term in like Catholic culture, even as a Catholic, I heard it for the first time during the 2016 election, when it was released that one of Hillary Clinton's advisors was using it in a mocking way towards Catholics. And so I said, wait, I kind of feel bad because I don't know what that is. If I'm going to be made fun of, I want to know why I'm being made fun of. And when I looked up the term, I said, yes, that's awesome. That's exactly what I think, how things should work. But my question, this is actually a question that was posed, is subsidiarity is often misunderstood as small government is better than big government. So can you explain, as a teacher, why our current coronavirus crisis highlights the actual definition of subsidiarity?
Well, as I understand the term, and it was new to me in 2016 as well, but it basically means you use the right amount of government for the right job, and you use the right level of government for the appropriate job. And for example, when President Trump told the governors that they would need to find respirators, well, that's probably true. Local areas need to find what's available to them locally. Maybe neighboring states, if there's available, can share. But when we have one central person in Washington trying to take care of everybody's needs, it doesn't work as well as the local authorities saying, this is what we need in Los Angeles, this is what we need in San Francisco, let's see if we can find these. So that would be one example. in California, I can't expect the governor to understand every single hospital in the country or in the state. But the local county supervisors, working with a small number of hospitals, can say, hey, you know what, we're in trouble here. We need to set up an immediate extra hospital somehow. And in China, they were able to construct 2 new hospitals in 2 weeks. There were some glitches. And there's no way that in our system we could put up something that quickly. But we should be able to put up, even a circus tent that could put beds in it and handle overflow. And that's something that at the local county supervisor's level could be done as they see what the needs are. Some things have to be done nationally. Some things should be done by the states. Some things should be done by the local governments.
Absolutely. And I think that this should be a reminder that when, these kind of discussions come up, I mean, I often see people argue, well, there's no need for a big government. Everything should be done locally. And here we have a perfect example of it just can't be that way. There are just certain things that need to be handled from a top-down model that inefficiency, I mean, there's just not an efficiency in going the other direction. And it's just not even plausible, for something to be rolled out nationwide, especially if you consider like the testing, that's kind of been poorly handled so far. But as we start to ramp that up, you have, the transmission of testing of kits and so forth. I mean, every state can't come up with their own testing. That's just not something that can be done. So, I think that's going to be something good for people to kind of point to is here's what happened to fix the situation. So I think that's a good point you made there.
Well, for example, something that the federal government has to be in charge of is grounding flights. If we're going to say that for a period of time, we're not going to have any flights from Europe or whatever, the decision is, that's an appropriate thing for the federal government. And ordinarily we would say, no, that's basically a decision for the airlines. We can't do that right now. We cannot let supply and demand govern our decisions on what airline flights come into the country. There's lots of people that would like to travel and would be willing to spend a lot, and the airlines could make a lot of money if they wanted to. But it's appropriate for the federal government, to take emergency action and say we're shutting down all flights to wherever or from wherever for a period of time and monitor that. And it does make it very hard on some people. You and I have a mutual friend who's in Indonesia right now trying to get home to Germany. And there are other people in situations like that. There is going to be some discomfort, but we're trying to minimize the number of deaths.
Absolutely. I mean, it's a bottom line kind of question to this. Okay, so today was big news. Although the term UBI wasn't mentioned, I didn't see it specifically mentioned in the press conference or any kind of news leading up to it, but President Trump did say there was consideration for checks being mailed out this month to every American as a stimulus package. And so the question, I think that was kind of my own introduction into this. The actual question that was posed had to do with, there's a lot of talk of UBI. Do you support UBI? And if not, please discuss alternative legislation that would accomplish the same aims as a universal benefit of income.
Well, I think the term I've used in the past when speaking specifically of UBI was that I was cautiously curious. But as events change, obviously, when Andrew Yang brought up UBI even just a couple months ago, Trump would have been apoplectic to think about it. But the conditions have changed. And our economy requires that there is money at the bottom to feed in to keep the system going. If we have people who are unable to pay their rent, if we have people who are unable to buy groceries, if we have people who are unable to pay their utilities, then our whole system grinds to a halt. One of the things that made the Depression worse in the 1930s was that there were not enough people at the bottom earning money to buy things, which meant companies they did not have a market for their goods. And so for a variety of reasons, one, we need to help the people who are out of work because of this. You know, when the president starts talking about the fact that this could go till July or August, I think the president was the one that said that. I heard that from somebody in authority. You know, if we're looking at an epidemic that could go until July or August, somehow we have to have a massive program that would not be acceptable in normal times. So for that point of view, yes, we need to look at something that looks like, call it what you want, looks a lot like a universal basic income. As Andrew Yang was talking about it, he was going to consolidate a lot of other programs into it. And as I understand it, President Trump's program is not consolidating anything. It's just a one-time. Andrew Yang was going to be monthly. This is a one-time, which will tide us over for another month. I do think that we could have a citizen's dividend that would pay out monthly, maybe not as much as Andrew Yang's UBI program. But right now, Congress has, and I support, HR 763, the carbon fee and dividend bill, in an effort to get our dependence on carbon down, coal and oil. It would put a fee on those coming as they come out of the ground, and that would go into a fund, a citizens fund, that would then be returned to every citizen. And the levels they're talking about now would be maybe like 4,000 per person per year. Now that's even under what this emergency thing is that Trump is talking about. Yang's was much higher month. His UBI was much higher than that. But a citizen's dividend that starts with the assumption that every American owns a share of America. And in Alaska, they were able to take all of the oil money there and spread it around to people in such a way, pay for government services in such a way that they had very, very low taxes of any other kind. That basically supported the government of Alaska. And we can use that same concept. For example, Nestle pumps water out of our national forests for free and puts it into plastic bottles and sells it back to us at enormous markup. They should be paying the people of America for the privilege of pumping our water and selling it back to us. That could go into that fund. There are other things that could be added to the fund one at a time to create a income for everybody, whether it would be the level of covering everybody's needs. I don't think so. I don't think we're ready for that. It might grow in that direction a little bit at a time. But a massive program like that, if this were not an emergency situation, could send our whole economy in some kind of a tailspin. We don't want to do that. But we're already in a tailspin. That's been done for us. We had no choice about it. And so now something like this, introduced now, we would have an opportunity to look at it and say, hey, did this work? What can we do to make it work better? And in that case, we might eventually wind up with the kind of UBI that Andrew Yang was suggesting.
Yeah, so I think that now we have some follow-up questions that were asked earlier, and I kind of, we have some plans on these questions. So the ones that I just asked you, you knew that was coming, and I was looking at these follow-ups. Can you see these follow-up questions, Brian, on your screen? I can read them to you. It's not a big deal. But like two that you kind of have answered, but let me go ahead and ask them if you have additional thoughts. So this is from Mark. I just met a guy last night living in an RV around the corner from my house. He's here to be near his ex-wife and son. He's lost both his jobs due to the virus. What can our party offer such a person? And so I think you kind of answered that, but if you have something else to add.
Well, anybody living in an RV, first of all, deserves our sympathy. And if we can find alternative incomes, for example, I have a nephew in Pennsylvania who's a busker. He plays fiddle at functions, and he's out of work. There are no more functions. And but he's also a very fine chef, and so he's advertising that he's going to bake bread and deliver it to people's doors. Right? That's something that our society suddenly needs. We need people who are going to deliver fresh groceries to people. And so one of the things we can do as a party is look for experts that can help us identify people's next best job. We don't know what the talents are of the fellow in the RV, but he had 2 jobs, which means he had some skills, something that can be used. And so we need to find ways to take those skills and put them to use for the general good, and so that he has some kind of an income.
Okay, yeah. Next question along those same lines is, it's kind of along those same lines. You said we're in a tailspin. It's not a tailspin of our making, but it's the one that's been handed to us. So how long can this lockdown in the economy continue before the damage becomes great enough to cause civil disorder? This is from Michael.
Well, I would hope that we never get to the point of civil disorder. And trying to predict how quickly we would get there, that's a fool's game. We can't predict that. But we certainly want to do everything we can to slow that down. We don't want to get to the point of civil disorder. And we want to discourage anybody who thinks they might be headed that direction. And as a party that is not in power right now, we have a limited ability to do that, except to just simply tell our neighbors, hey, calm down, tell me what you need, let's see if we can get it for you. I think we probably have enough stuff stored away in different places that we can help each other. And there have been, unfortunately, lots of people living very close to the wire for a long time, and they don't have the help. They don't have the stores. And we need to try and figure out where there are things that we can find that can help them.
Okay, absolutely. I think we've kind of answered, Eric. I hope your question of what steps will we take in the economy to help, we kind of answered in those few responses. So I think, Brian, this actually leads us, that last question about civil disorder leads us to the next question. And this is one that Matthew posed earlier today. What should governments, federal, state, and local, not do to fight an epidemic?
What should we not do?
Yeah, limitations. I kind of asked him to clarify, and he was definitely about what should the limitations of government be while we're talking about what we should do.
Well, we always want to protect civil liberties as much as we can. But depending upon the severity of this, we might have to limit some civil liberties. During extreme crises, Presidents have been forced to do that. During the Civil War, Lincoln was forced to declare martial law for the whole state of Maryland. But then quickly, when the war was over, that was lifted. You know, we don't want to do anything that's going to permanently inhibit our civil liberties or make it easier for some president later to do that. I wish I could trust our president to only go as far as is necessary. I'm very uncomfortable with some of his past behavior in that area and his past willingness to disregard civil liberties. But sometimes you have to do that. Sometimes you have to declare that people are not allowed on the street, or you have to declare something like that. If it got that bad, you know, in Italy, if you're out on the street without papers explaining what your errand is, they're arresting you. We don't want to get there any sooner than we have to, but if it gets to that point, it's always a balance of what you're trading off. We have a strong tradition in our country of civil rights, civil liberties, and we want to protect that. But we also want to protect, you know, we don't want any more people dying than have to.
Okay, so this question kind of answered, or you kind of addressed some of the president's past behavior. So this one actually specifically talks to that. What would you do differently than Donald Trump to address the federal government's response to this crisis?
I think in the last few days, President Trump has been more presidential than he's been at any time during his term in office. And I like to think that he's rising to the occasion. But he was slow getting started. I saw a report. I would like to think it's not true, but I saw a report that he was attempting to buy the rights to some of the new medicines that were pharmaceuticals that were being developed to fight this. You know, there's no excuse for that. There is no way that anybody can be profiteering, and especially not top levels in our government. Boy, I hope that's wrong, but I saw the report. And the president has a history of lying to people. And unfortunately, now when we need him to be telling us the truth, it's hard for us to trust him. That's not something that you can start saying, okay, everybody, from now on, I'm going to tell the truth. That doesn't work. You have to create a history of telling the truth. And our president has not. So that's the first thing I would do differently from the first day of office, is tell the truth. Don't have the string of lies that make it so nobody can trust you. That's the first thing. As far as his efforts now, I think most of his efforts are the correct thing to do.
Yeah, you know, I think considering that question myself, I was thinking about how, yes, the president has a history of bending the truth for sure, and right when the whole epidemic started in China, and that it was going to make its way here, of course, his first response was that it was a hoax. You know, and while he was saying it was a hoax, the Democrats were working on the case in the Senate against him after the impeachment, and they didn't address it themselves. And so then shortly after that, when it started to become very serious in China, I think that timeline says that he had the travel ban against China. So there were no more planes, in and out of China. And of course, the Democrats said that he was being xenophobic and overreacting. And, like this kind of, it seems like our government as a whole, as a response, it's like partisanship was kind of cooked into the equation. It's like, what do we do? What did the other side do first? And let's point out how that's wrong and how we can do it better, or actually just how that's wrong. And then we won't quite say what we're going to do yet until we know more, and this becomes this chess game of, when can we act with the most amount of information so we don't do something wrong so they can call it out, and I think that hopefully, again, it's hard to say, but next time there's a crisis, can we kind of just cut to the chase and start working together sooner? I think that's one of the things that I would hope, and if we had an administration, like you said, that talked honesty from the get-go, from day one, that we'd be able to say, all right, we're working on this and we're going to tell you what we know as soon as we know it to the level that we are allowed to share. And we're going to work with the other side, or the other two sides, I suppose, as well as we can, and give credit where credit is due, which I think that's where you can't give anybody credit, because the next election is around the corner, as opposed to the next American is getting sick and the next one's dying. So I think when you start with partisanship as your baseline, when you have a duopoly, you kind of have to, but it'd be nice to see politicians start from the common good on everything. Like, what's the best for everyone? And then can I make it work for my party? And it would really bring the parties closer, as like they were maybe back in the 70s. So where there was still a difference and there were two parties, but they weren't, miles apart on everything and at each other's throats.
You're absolutely right. And partisanship, which we've known was a problem for many years, which has kept us from having the kind of national health care that would have helped us a whole lot in this situation. When you go back to Romney, when he was governor of Massachusetts, created Romney Care, and Obama used it as a pattern when he did national health care. And so then we had Obamacare, which was based kind of on Romney Care. And then Romney runs against Obama, but he cannot support it because it belonged to Obama. So he's running against the program that modeled itself on his own program. And that kind of partisanship is going to kill us. We have so many people now who are unemployed, or they are employed in businesses that do not have health care with them. So 80% of our working poor do not have a single day of paid sick leave, which, if somebody is sick, you don't want them flipping your hamburger. You want them to go home, take some days off, and get well. Not just COVID-19, but any flu or cold that they've got. We need to have a system where those people can survive if they stay home when they're sick. We need to have a system where everybody can be tested without having to worry about a bill of $3,500 coming when they're only making a couple $100 a week. We have not been able to solve the problem because of our partisanship. Things that most Americans would like to see, neither party wants to let the other party have credit for it. And that's a serious problem. And now we've got, excuse me, the package that the House just passed. Again, the Democrats should have known, I'm sure they knew, that if they wrote that bill, leaving the Hyde Amendment out, that the Republicans would not be able to go along with it. So it's like they're waving the red cape for a bullfighter in front of them and saying, we dare you to not vote for this package that the people need because of the coronavirus. That kind of partisanship is completely out of place in a crisis like we're in now.
I agree. I think that, we're in this place of our own making. I think in terms of the politicians that we've selected and the system that we've allowed to operate to a certain extent. I think that we just need to be more active in demanding a better voting system, a better primary structure, so that we can get away from the radicals always taking the primaries, because they're the ones that can get their vote out ahead of the moderates that might be willing to reach across the aisle and make the decisions for the common good. So I think that's something that a party like ours can do fusion work with other parties, third parties, to say, when there's an opening in a state level for some kind of reform, that's where we can kind of make some headway against the duopoly.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so I think there's a question that is really a follow-up to the universal basic income question, or just the stimulus package, really. The question is from an Eric. I'm worried that cash sent directly to citizens would likely be spent on Amazon after rent and groceries and utilities and such. And social distancing is keeping people out of local stores. So is this the right approach? What are your thoughts on that, Brian?
Well, first of all, I think Amazon announced today that their distribution centers would only be handling medical things. They would not be distributing ordinary things. Secondly, there are always going to be people who misspend what's given to them. But I don't think we can refuse to do a program because some people might misspend it. There are people hurting, lots of people hurting, and we need a program quickly to help those people. We need the program in place to keep our economy functioning. And what generally happens with where UBI has been tried is that people still try and do what they can to help themselves get a better job even while they're getting a UBI. And yeah, I don't like to see local businesses hurt because people are spending on Amazon. But on the other hand, when Amazon delivers, that helps people to self-distance, social distancing, and that's a critical need right now. We need people to stop interacting as much as possible.
Okay, yeah, and I agree. And I think one of the things that this ties in with that question and what the government, the question was, what should the government not do? And I think that one of the things that the government should not do is take any action without that level of communication, without the plan to support those that that action would affect. And so I think, one of the things that both questions go with is, in Illinois, and I'm assuming in a lot of states, they've shut down dine-in at restaurants. Okay, mm-hmm. If you're going to shut down dine-in, they have actually, to their credit, created a system to support carryout. And I think they worked with some of these carryout places, like Uber Eats. There's a couple of the delivery centers that either greatly reduced or cut out their cost for delivery. They just paid their drivers. So whatever the normal tip and driving amount was covered, but no delivery costs. That's a good thing, right? That kind of thing where you're going to shut something down, but you keep something open. Like one of the things is, and I haven't seen this yet, unfortunately, and it's been quite a cause of concern, is the shutdown of large gatherings, which would include, church gatherings, mosques, synagogues, and so forth. And I think the underestimation of how much physical, mental, and spiritual support so many people get from those gatherings, and churches have stepped up, but there still is a need, and I think that we have to. Hopefully, we'll see some some remedy to that as we go on, because there are a lot of people that get a lot of primary social support from their church communities. And so one of the things, like you were saying, is like how long this is going to go on is having some level of what are we looking for. Like right now, I feel like when the leak came out and the stock market dropped 3,000 points, that kind of goes to when Trump said, well, it might go until July or August. Well, there really is not a necessary statement, right? Like, was that really something that anyone needed to know? Even if it was the absolute truth, sometimes it's not necessary to give the absolute truth. More of a, we may be in this for the long term. Let's work on this together. Here's what we can do to support you. But at the flip side is, if we work on this together, these are the signs we're looking for in order to get out of this, right? And I think it also then gives people the confidence to make those right decisions. A lot of times we say, what should you not do? I think we've learned, hopefully, and hopefully in my school, I noticed the attendance was way, way up the last couple of weeks after all of this was going on, because people were washing their hands, as we told them to do, were refraining from sharing drinks and food, and having too many people in an enclosed space. So we had, even though it's normal flu season, which was a rough flu season, everything just stopped, and everyone was in school for two or three, and now we're out. But I was amazed. I mean, I noticed it in my class when I was doing attendance. I mean, it's like present. I had no one to mark absent. So that was a good thing. And so there's positives. I think the question, which was, people won't, frequent their stores. Well, I mean, maybe it's something you have to celebrate. I mean, you just say that, we sent out this money and look how well people are supporting their local neighborhoods. Kudos to local solidarity, for example. And you can still limit, like I would say, don't go out for you, but when I go out, I do my business. I don't touch many surfaces, and I get what I need, and I go home and I wash I first, if it's produce or whatever, I get some vinegar and wash all my stuff, and then wash my hands, and before I touch anything, before I touch anybody in my family. And so, positive reinforcement is a great thing. And I think that that's something we can get from our leadership, that's supportive. Like, these are the things that people are doing well. Like I said the other day, I went to the blood bank, and I really restored my hope in my community when so many people were there. I thought, like, why are they even open at 7? It's kind of a weird thing. But when I went in there were, within a few minutes of me getting there was a full room. Every seat was taken.
Mm-hmm.
That was pretty awesome.
That's good.
Yeah. All right. So it's only a couple more questions here. I didn't want to take you too long, and we can always do this again. I think, as we said at the beginning, this is going to be a frequent occurrence. So this is a question. So what lessons should we learn from this crisis that we did not learn from the housing bubble crisis in 2008?
Well, the first difference I see in the help we're giving, in the housing bubble, instead of giving it to the people at the bottom who were losing their houses, in which case they would have paid their mortgages, in which cases the banks would have survived anyway, we dumped the money in at the top and gave it directly to the banks. And so the banks still foreclosed on houses, and people lost their homes, and we saved a bunch of banks, but we hurt a lot of people. And the community that was hurt the most was the African American community. They had least to start with as far as cumulative wealth, and they lost a greater percentage of the little bit that they had. We could have done it so much differently by giving help to the people at the bottom who were about to lose their houses, so that they could keep their houses, and the banks still would have gotten their money, and the banks would have not had to take over thousands of houses that they had nothing to do with. They couldn't unload them. So the first thing is the fact that President Trump is looking at a way to infuse money at the bottom, and it'll go to the top. Eventually the people at the top will have it, but at least it will help the people at the bottom on the way. So that's something that we did learn from our mistake in the past. As far as other mistakes that we've learned this time, we're still too new in this. We're still reacting on a day-to-day basis, and we have not had time to sit down and reflect and say, okay, what did we learn? That process will come later.
Okay, and I think as I was reflecting on that question, the first thing that I thought of was, I just, to be honest, I look at a lot of different websites, Facebook groups, Facebook sites. I see a lot of different posts and opinions, just to get a sense of what people are thinking, kind of the mindset of maybe the average American or just different sections of Americans. And the first lesson that I kind of have taken out of this is how fragile our economy is. How even the most staunchest defenders of laissez-faire capitalism have to admit that the system can't work on itself in this sort of situation. The market can't correct that kind of volatility. As you were saying earlier, there's no supply and demand kind of curve that can get this thing done in any kind of time without the government jumping in. And they already put a 1.5 trillion into essentially the banks and the banking system and the short-term loan situation for stuff to keep moving.
Mm-hmm.
Talking about another trillion, and it's necessary. Without it, like the person who posed the question said, we'd be well on our way to chaos. So I think people have to admit that there is no such thing as government hands off of the economy the way it currently is. So I think it's just impossible. It's an impossibility. So the next question kind of leads into, I think this idea of what administrative actions could be requests of Congress, kind of working with Congress, would you do to support mechanisms that allow workers to share in the ownership and management of their production, such as trade guilds, cooperatives, employee stock ownership programs?
Well, anything that we can do to allow new people into the system, entrepreneurs, talented young people, get them started, would be to our benefit. And all the things you mentioned can be facilitated by legislation. The recent one I saw was, there's a company in near Portland, Oregon that sells flour, Ben's something or other, Ben's Red, I don't know, I forget the name of the company. But they're pretty big in milling flour and selling it, especially to specialty shops and things. And the founder just turned the company over to the workers. He created set the company up in such a way that the workers themselves take over from him as he, I don't know whether he just retired or what. Anyway, it was just a recent process. And we could, with legislation, make that easier and more efficient. He did it on his own with the current tax laws, but we could definitely change the tax laws to encourage more companies to do that kind of thing. Otherwise, giant conglomerates would buy his company out. And that's the opposite direction. We don't want it to go that direction. We want people who are doing the work to have ownership in it. There are thousands of little things that can be done that cumulatively have a bigger effect. Not everybody has a company that they founded that they're going to turn over to the workers. But for example, it is very difficult in our system to break into some businesses. I have a young friend who would like to be a barber. He does not have the means to go to barber school. All right. So that in order to be a barber, you've got to have a license, which means you've got to go to take classes, which means, you've got tuition at the barber school. And that keeps people out. We need to find ways to qualify people without having to set the bar so high. But there are so many of these kinds of things that, you can't have a blanket statement for everything. You just kind of have to say, we have to take these on a case-by-case basis, know what we want to do as our final goal is to spread the ownership class so that more people have direct ownership in the work that they're doing. And once we've said that's our goal, then we just look for ways, little ways oftentimes, that can facilitate that.
Yeah, I think that, well, you can tell me what you think about this. I think I just saw the other day that the airlines, who have been hit obviously very hard by, just people not traveling around as much, have asked for help from the federal government for billions of dollars in relief. And in my thinking, kind of along those lines of how would we use the administrative branch, the executive branch, or even to work with Congress, is that when they're getting this kind of bailout money, this loan, let's say, from the federal government, I know that from just research that Southwest Airlines has been an industry leader in worker ownership. I'm not exactly sure how their structure works, but I think employee just their benefit structure very much owned on or connected to the profit of the company. And I always fly Southwest because the people are super, super happy. They're very polite, and they know that repeat customer activity is just better for the company, which means it's better for them. I think they're generally fairly happy with their wages. I don't think they've had any strikes or anything like that. So obviously there is something to a culture of worker ownership. And so, when a company takes bailout money, you can say, and this is something that when we had the whole business tax cut that went into play, right? And they just gave them the tax cut. They said, here, you have no, loopholes to jump through. We're just going to give everybody equally this tax cut. And I think in that situation, and in the situation of the airlines, it's like, we're going to give you this money, or we're going to give you this tax cut, but you're going to get incentives to get more tax cuts or less payback or whatever if you get your workers ownership. And again, I don't know the math that I would choose to kind of model that, but perhaps you get a 3% tax cut if you give ownership to your employees, but you only get a 2% tax cut if you don't, or whatever what we don't want to do, right? I think there's an article that I do need to share with party members that we put on our blog that John Maydai wrote a while back about, if I can remember the title of this now, it was, we want to be patriotic subversives to the capitalist system, right? I mean, we work within the system. It's the system we have. It's not going to change overnight. And if we tried to, it would be, like you said, it'd be a debacle. At the same time, there's an end goal that we want to get to, and we can make progress to that on the whole way, kind of explaining, and as we are both teachers, educating people to why it's just better. And you can look at the companies that run under that model are happier, they're more stable, they might not be the most profitable as the bottom line, but when the bottom line isn't about people, isn't about money, but it's about people, it works better, overall for everyone. So
Well, you could even do something fairly simple by saying to the airline, we'd like to bail you out, but in return, we would like to see you put, X number of slots on your board of directors to union leadership, or whatever it is we're trying to accomplish in a particular industry. We can use this as an opportunity to get people to do or get businesses to do the things that we would like them to do anyway.
Exactly. All right, so then we have a pretty intense question. Now it's a foreign policy question that's related to this whole crisis, and that is Russia is open and honest about attacking American oil industry right now, threatening to make a global recession even harder on Americans. How would we respond to this?
Well, there's several ways that we would have to come at it. One is we are over dependent on oil right now, and we need to reduce our dependency. And we have already talked about the carbon fee and dividend bill. We probably are going to have to replace some of our oil dependency with nuclear. This question doesn't really address that, but we will need to find other ways to get our energy that makes us less dependent on oil. And that's something that Jimmy Carter told us, 45 years ago. We need to divorce ourselves from dependence on oil. It will free us up from so many foreign policy problems around the world. Russia, of course, is open about wanting to hurt us, but they want to do it in a way that is the least expensive way. And so they're doing a lot of things. They get on our social media and try and create fights between different factions of our population. They try and make us question the news we hear, so that we are, even when we hear true news, we are suspicious of it because there's so much false news being pushed around by the Russians and others. And so the first thing we need to do is simply get our act together. Stop arguing with each other so much and pay attention to when they're trying to get us to fight, and say, you know what, we're Americans, we're not going to fight with each other, and not open ourselves to the kinds of things that Russia is trying to do to us. And then the other thing is, we know that Russia wants to hurt us, but we don't need to feel like we have to hurt Russia in return. We want to protect ourselves. But a lot of people in the world are legitimately suspicious of us because we have pulled a lot of shenanigans on people. And the whole Cold War thing, where Russia and the United States were constantly finding ways to hurt each other. We need to just stand back and say, we're not going to hurt you, and mean it. And yes, we're going to defend ourselves, but we are not going to go, eye for an eye. We're not going to do that anymore. And it will take a while of doing that before people start to say, oh, hey, they've changed. You can't just change overnight, announce, all right, I'm not going to do that anymore, and have people trust you. But we need to make it a long-term priority that we are not going to intervene in countries. We are not going to topple elected leaders, even if they're socialists or communists. We recently were involved, I think, in the overthrow in Bolivia because we want the lithium. And we need to be able to say, all right, you know what, we accept your elections, and we're going to try and work with the people that you elect, even if they don't share our government priorities, but we are going to make it a policy around the world not to overthrow elected governments. And again, it's going to take people a while to realize that that's our policy, that needs to be our policy.
All right, that's a great answer. So I think we'll end. I think I was shooting for an hour. We're right about there. And we have a final question from Thad that I think pulls this together fairly well, and can put a period on this whole discussion. And it's what future opportunities and possibilities do you see for our nation, given the solidarity, pulling together, and the logistical lessons we are learning and we're going to continue to learn from this pandemic? And it can be for the economy, just the common good in general, ending poverty, healthcare, et cetera. Like, what can you, I know you can't put on your crystal ball, the Brian Carroll's crystal ball, but, the lessons that we learn moving forward, what do you think, Brian?
Well, humanity is, everybody's connected. What's it been, 3 months, maybe less than 3 months, that the first person in Wuhan was infected by this, and now it's everywhere. Today it reached the last of the 50 states. Every single state is involved, and there are some countries that it's not as bad yet, but everybody's got it. It's there, and it's just a matter of time. We are all connected, every one of us. And what happens to somebody in Wuhan makes a difference to us. And I was thinking today in triage, when you cut everything else out and save just what's most important. And I was thinking of the rich young ruler who came to Jesus and said, cut all the other rules out. When you boil it down to the basics, what is it? And he said 2 things. 1, love the Lord your God. And secondly, treat your neighbor as you would have them, or love your neighbor as yourself. Basically goes into the golden rule then. Treat your neighbor as you would want to be treated. And so when we cut everything else out, the basic minimum triage rule is watch out for your neighbor. And when we say, well, who's our neighbor? Well, it basically comes down to anybody who can give you a virus on short notice must be your neighbor. And so that pretty much includes everybody between here and Wuhan. They're all our neighbors. And we have to look at them that way and treat them that way. Their problem is immediately our problem. And we need to do what we can to help reduce their problems.
Love it. That was a fantastic ending. I really appreciate your time, Brian, and everyone else who was here. Great questions. I'm gonna set up something so we can have questions, but probably do this again maybe next week, and that'll give more time. And that was only on short notice that we got such great questions. So let's work on maybe planning on next Tuesday. But again, Brian, thank you so much for your time, and everyone else, and we will see you next week.
Thank you, Amar.
Yep. Goodbye.